Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Now, I know many of my listeners have never been to Independence, Missouri, the Jackson County area. So this is where the first temple that Joseph Smith designed, but was never built. And, Independence is the headquarters of both the Community of Christ, the Temple Lot Church, the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ, the Cutlerite Church. There's lots of groups there. And so what I thought we could do, the Mormon Missouri Frontier Foundation has created some plaques, and you can go on a walking tour of Independence and see some of these old Mormon sites. Now, some of the sites have been torn down, but they have plaques to commemorate that. So in the next conversation, this is a presentation I gave back in September to a Community of Christ group, and I thought it might be nice for you guys to join me on this walk. And so here's my presentation to this group.
All right, well, I'm going to try to share my screen here, and we're going to hopefully talk about the first Book of Mormon mission. One of the interesting things is when the missionaries came through Kirtland, they were on their way to Missouri. They had a few converts in Kirtland, but they didn't give very many copies of the Book of Mormon out to the local residents because they were trying to go to Missouri, because Missouri was supposed to be the New Jerusalem. And so this really was even though there were some missionaries in Kirtland, and then Kirtland kind of became its own little center of the restoration, the goal always was Missouri. So this past fall in September, for the John Whitmer Historical Associations, I went to the Temple Lot Church, and they gave me this pamphlet. I've kind of cut it up into pieces, and we're going to kind of go through it. You can see at the bottom here, there's a map, and we're going to start at the Temple Lot Church, and then we're going to visit all these places that deal with the restoration, including Governor Boggs Homes, I guess I should say. And so it was surprising because I think it took about an hour and a half to do this, although me and my friend Matthew Turner, if I can get my slide to advance here, there he is. There's Matthew Turner. He was kind of my buddy as we went through this. He's a good friend that lives there in Kansas, and also a Mormon history geek as well. So one of the things about this tour is you're basically looking all over for these little plaques in the sidewalk. And so Matthew is standing basically at his feet. You can see this plaque here, where Joseph Smith and other Mormon leaders dedicated the temple lot. So on the white building here on the top right, you can see is the Temple Lot Church across the street from the Community of Christ Temple. And of course, just on the left side of Matt's head here, you can see the Stone Church, which was the first RLDS church that was actually, I think, if I remember right, I think it was the first church in Missouri, and that was overseen by Joseph Smith III, which we could almost just do a presentation on that building because it's such a beautiful building inside. But my focus here today is to kind of hit these 14 stops. That it's a nice little walking tour, and even in September, Missouri can get pretty hot, and I remember Matthew, I was like, why are you wearing a long sleeve shirt? And he's, a good person, trying not to get skin cancer. So he was dressed well. So even though it was pretty warm, but anyway, so the temple lot, of course, that's where the church was going to try to build the first of 24 temples. And in the 1930s, you can see here, this is a picture on the right. They actually broke ground and dug out this hill, and you can see some of the footings they put in there. to try to put in the temple. And so this is the ground that was dedicated by Joseph Smith on August 13, 1831. The church had purchased it from Jonas Flournoy, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. And so this was really the first gathering place for the church. And I'm just going to call it church because at this point, there's no RLDS church, there's no LDS church. It was actually the Church of Christ back in 1831. And so we were all together in one big happy family. But this nice black and white photo here on the right, I think is really cool. I love the tractor. You can see. So this was built, or they started building this just before the Depression hit. And then, of course, the Great Depression hit and they couldn't finish it. And so it sat just as an ugly hole for probably a couple of decades. President Harry Truman is from Independence. You can kind of see that on the left side with this little green photograph, you can kind of see the hill there. The city of Independence offered to fill in the hole because the Temple Lot Church just didn't have the money to fill it in, and they didn't want Harry Truman when he came home from being president of the United States to come home and see this ugly eyesore because it looked terrible. And so the city offered to fill in the hole, and that's what we have now. So so during the excavation, they found these two stones here, Southeast Corner Temple. I think that's what SECT stands for, in 1831. And these were two of the original store. And then it looks like a backwards 4, which is a mark for surveyors or something like that. And so they've got little markers in that grass lot that you can see there. I love this picture on the right where people are standing in the where the foundation would have been for the church temple, and you can see that it's right next to the church there. So this is a cool photograph courtesy of the Temple Lot Church. So that's pretty cool. Now the next picture here, this when the Saints came to Independence, the land was owned by Jacob Flournoy, and this was his actual home. And so, and it's funny because it's both Jacob and Jones. I've heard both. I probably should have put Jones on there. Jones Flournoy lived in this small brick house. This actually has been moved. It's not far from the original location. We'll find out where the original location is now. But this is a Community of Christ historic site there. It's literally across the street from the Temple Lot Church. And so this was Jones Flournoy had just purchased this probably a week before the Saints came, and then he ended up selling it to the Saints. Made a small profit, not a big profit at all, but so this was the what's known as the Flournoy house. I think my shed is bigger than this house. It's just a tiny house. But you know, this was Frontier, Missouri back then. And so Bishop Edward Partridge purchased this on the behalf of the church, and the 63 acres, which includes land where both the Community of Christ Temple is and the LDS Visitor Center. So the Temple Lot Church just has a small portion of the Temple Lot, but the Community of Christ and the LDS Church own other portions of the Temple Lot. So it's actually really huge. Originally, Joseph had planned on 24 temples in Independence, and actually he planned that for Kirtland as well. And so, but they never even got the original one built, and they've made a couple of attempts now. But anyway, so this was the man that they purchased the land from and it's directly across the street from the temple lot. Next photo, you can see kind of behind the tree here is the Community of Christ Temple. And so this is stop number 3, the Partridge home site and school. Bishop Edward Partridge, his home was right here, right behind that bench basically. And of course, Bishop Partridge was tarred and feathered in the public square. We're going to visit that here shortly. And there was also a brick schoolhouse, and it was used as a meeting house in unpleasant weather. So this is also the place where Mormons surrendered their weapons to the Missouri militia in November of 1833 during those hostilities there. So that's literally basically just on the temple grounds there in Independence. Stop number 4. Unfortunately, I didn't take a picture of this on my trip, and so this is a Google Maps photo. But this is the original location of the Flournoy home, and you can see the Community of Christ Temple there in the background, and it's just kind of an open area there now. So I talked to Matthew, and I'm like, "Do you have a picture of this?" And he didn't take any pictures either, so I had to go to Google Maps and take this photo. That's why there's snow on the ground. But this was the original location of the Jones Flournoy home, and it was constructed in 1826. So moving on, you'll find that a lot of these places are, like here's a picture of a fence, basically. This is the Rathbun lot 43. And this was one of the blacksmith shops that was broken into in July 20th, 1833. The Rathbuns were eventually forced to leave the county. You can see a picture of Matthew, and then of course right at his feet are the plaque there. So there's just kind of another business here. So that's stop number 5. The public square, we mentioned this earlier. This is where Bishop Edward Partridge and Charles Allen were tarred and feathered right here on July 20th, 1833. It's funny because it's now the Jackson County Courthouse, and so it also has some other significance not related to Mormonism. But yeah, this was the public square. There were escalating tensions between the Mormons and Missouri settlers. Sidney Rigdon's preached here from the courthouse steps in 1832, and so the Mormon leaders were arrested and subsequently appeared in the courtroom here. And the funny thing is, it's a courtroom now. So I think I have some more pictures. Oh, I didn't put the pictures in. But yeah, it's a big courthouse now, and so it kind of has continued on with that function. With Harry Truman coming from Independence, Missouri, a lot of these sites have significance both to Mormons, but as well as Harry Truman. And so I thought I'd put in more pictures there, but I guess I didn't. Stop number 7 is the Gilbert and Whitney store that has been basically restored. You can kind of see what it looked like, or what they think it looked like. Kind of artist rendering there, and what it looks like now. My friend Matthew's sitting there. And so this was the site of the Gilbert and Whitney store. It was purchased in November of 1832 by Sidney Gilbert. And in 1833, 500 men gathered to demolish the establishment. So now it's a nice brick building. So it's nice. This is one of the few places, and you can see they didn't really restore it to the original. The funny thing is, we went on a Monday. Almost everything was closed. I was surprised on a Monday. But this was the site for the Gilbert and Whitney store. And so it's kind of nice that they've kind of revived that place and given it the same name that it was in the 1830s. Moving on, we have a printing office, and the funniest thing is, I think there's some printing that actually does go on here. Obviously, the original building has been torn down, but this was the first paper published in Independence, Missouri. It was called the Evening and Morning Star. W.W. Phelps was the printer, and his family resided here. And this was one of the big things here was where this was where W.W. Phelps had printed an article called Free People of Color. And that was kind of the last straw between the Missourians and the Mormons, was the fact that the paper welcomed blacks to come to the town, but free blacks. But of course, at the time, Missouri was a slave state, and so the local Missouri settlers thought they were inviting free blacks to town, and they did not like that. As a result, the mobs broke in and pied the type, basically scattered the type there. Also, the Book of Commandments were being published, and those were strewn all over. It was Helen Mar Whitney. She was just a young girl of about 12 years old at the time. She helped kind of gather up some of the original Book of Commandments, and so we're kind of lucky to have anything left, because it was being printed, and any copies we have were gathered by those girls. Oh, Mary Elizabeth and Carolyn, Sidney Gilbert's nieces. I know Helen Mar Kimball was another one. They risked their lives to gather up the original, the precursor to the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Commandments. And so there's there's so few copies. If you can get a Book of Commandments, it's worth way more than first edition copies of the Book of Mormon. So so this was the site of quite a riot back then, and it's not far from the public square and courthouse where we just were, and leaders were charged there. So the building was repaired and occupied until about 1930. Of course, this is a new building here now. So this was the printing office where the Book of Commandments came from. Log Courthouse. This one's kind of a dual site in the fact that not only does it have Mormon significance, but it's got Harry Truman significance. So this was the first Jackson County courthouse. It was built in 1827 by slave labor. The county built the new brick courthouse on the public square in 1830. So Sidney Gilbert purchased the building and vacated the building for $371. It's amazing how prices have changed. So it was the home of the Gilbert family, and including Mary Elizabeth Rollins. Oh, she was one of the girls. I think I called her Leitner, but her maiden name was Rollins. But she was also one of the girls that helped gather up the Book of Commandments, I believe. So in November of 1832, Sidney Gilbert relocated the church store to the lot 51, but his family continued to reside in the former log courthouse, and it was moved here in 1916 for preservation purposes. The other interesting thing about it is not only was it the first log courthouse in Independence, but it also served functions for Judge and future President Harry S. Truman. And so President Truman, when he was a judge, used this building as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that it has ties to both early Mormonism and President Truman. Governor Boggs, probably one of the most infamous people in Mormon history. You can see where Matthew is standing there. That's basically where I believe it was his first house. And this was when he was actually nice to the Mormons. So Boggs furnished some space for the Whitmers, and Alexander Donovan, a Clay County lawyer, said Peter Whitmer was a tailor, and I employed him to make him a suit of clothes. So this was interesting that that Boggs let Peter Whitmer there and use that as a tailor shop. But as you can see, it's basically a parking lot now. So so that's kind of funny. The Nolan House is lot number 10. It was a popular inn. It was located on the corner of Main and Maple. So in 1838, Joseph Smith and Mormon leaders were held here under house arrest while awaiting trial. They were occasionally they let prisoners walk around town, and they visited the temple lot. And Parley Pratt wrote that when he saw it last, it was a noble forest, but our enemies had robbed it of every single vestige of timber, and it now lay desolate or clothed with grass and weeds. So it's now, once again, this is another one of those dual sites where not only does it bear significance for Joseph Smith and other leaders that were held there, but it's also the Clinton's drugstore was also a site that Harry Truman visited frequently. So it's kind of fun that some of these sites have dual roles in Mormonism as well as with President Harry Truman. So this is the jail / firehouse museum. You can see it looks like a firehouse with the big doors there. It's now a museum by the National Park Service, but this was the original location of a jail that later became a firehouse, and now it's a museum. And so it's right just kitty corner across from the Nolan House that we were just looking at. So it wasn't far to go from the house arrest to the jail there. So this is the plaque for that firehouse. It was the 1827 county jail, and you can see this little cabin basically that it had an outside stairway, and an upper room was the only way to enter the structure. Prominent Mormons Sidney Gilbert, William McClellan, John Corral, Isaac Morley were all jailed in the lower dungeon. If you've seen the Liberty Jail, these are very similar looking structures, and so it basically served as a dungeon in November of 1833 when Mormon leaders were jailed there. A decade later, Orrin Porter Rockwell was held in the second jail built on the site, and it's the present building of the fire station where it serves as the Truman Home ticket office, as we saw on the last slide. Church leaders were arrested following a battle between Christian Whitmer's cornfield in the Kaw Township, and so that's basically where they were jailed. So kind of interesting to see how it looked then and how it looks now. It's obviously quite different, but anyway, so that's kind of fun. There's also, I should mention, these plaques were put in by the Missouri-Mormon Frontier Association, MMFF. And so it's nice because there were some other places outside of Independence, and this organization has tried to put plaques where key events in Mormon history took place. So we can be grateful to them because they're not, I don't think they're associated with either the LDS Church or the Community of Christ. And so it's nice that they've gotten together and put these places together so you know exactly where some of these key events happened. And then we're going to conclude our tour with the Boggs Home. I confess that it made me happy to know that the Boggs Home was torn down. it's just kind of an empty field or empty hill here now. But so we're looking, you can see there where the plaque is, but that's what they think it looked like. Of course, Governor Boggs issued the 1838 extermination order. And I didn't realize, of course, when he was governor, how deep his roots were to independence. And so, and this is also the house where Porter Rockwell was accused of the assassination attempt of Governor Boggs. And so, you know, with the extermination order, over 5,000 Mormons from the state were expelled from the state of Missouri. And, you know, I have to say, we went to a restaurant, I'm trying to remember where that was, and they had a mural of a lot of Mormon events. And I thought, I wonder how many people who grew up in Independence, I mean, they have to be familiar with the Mormon past, but if they understand how deeply Mormon this city was. So anyway, I definitely went through that tour a lot faster than it took me and Matthew. But I thought, you know, many of us don't live in Independence, and so I thought it would be fun to kind of give a little tour of Independence and see where some of these key Mormon sites were. You know, and like I said, it was the first real mission where they brought the Book of Mormon. They couldn't even spare any in Kirtland for the converts there. They brought the Book of Mormon here to Independence, and so anyway, that kind of concludes my presentation.
I hope you enjoyed our tour through Independence. It was a lot of fun, and thanks to Matt Turner for being my host and guide. And we actually saw a lot more stuff than just this presentation. So anyway, Matt, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. In our next conversation, I'm really excited to introduce Dan McClellan. He's an LDS scholar and a real Bible expert, and we're going to get into a lot of early worship among the Canaanites and Israelites.
Yeah, monotheism is something that is a philosophical construct, and so it's not until you have members of these religious groups who are adopting a lot of philosophical frameworks that they start to move into thinking about the relationship of our God to any other gods, and coming up with this idea that there can only be one supreme God, and then rejecting the deity of the other gods. It's a very complex process.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe at gospeltangents.com or on patreon.com/gospeltangents, or you can watch entire videos at youtube.com/gospeltangents. I really can't do this without your support. I'd love to do it full time, and I need a lot more people that are willing to help me out. So I'd really appreciate that. So thanks again for listening, and don't forget to check out some of our other videos.